Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
All right, here we go. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford. We're recording this typically Thursday morning just after 8:30, so the usual warning, things may have changed by the time you hear this, and given, again, the way things have unfolded this past week, holy cow, it's minute by minute. So around the table here quickly, Kathleen Wynne is here, former Premier of Ontario, Tim Hudak, former leader of the PC Party at Council Public Affairs, and Keith Leslie, a longtime observer and veteran reporter out of Queen's Park. And how many years did you spend at Canadian Press?
35 at CP.
Nice.
Yeah. And a good chunk of those were at Queen's Park, right?
Yeah, about 18 of them over two different tours, but yeah, about 18 of them altogether.
Yeah.
At Queen's
So
Park.
he knows a thing or two about a thing or two that happened at Queen's Park over the last
I watched a
little while.
lot of stuff there.
You did watch a lot
Unlike
of
these
stuff.
two who participated, I watched. But
Just being the paid observer. That's what we
that's
are.
exactly.
Right? Recovering news directors. I know we want to get to the provincial politics and so on, and we will, and what's going on at Queen's Park. But I don't think, Kathleen Wynne, we can start any conversation this week without talking about what's gone on in the Middle East. And as we speak, I'm just looking at the headline at CTV, and again, things may have changed by the time you hear this, but Trump warns if agreement's not reached with Iran, quote, then the shooting starts bigger and better, unquote. You know, I don't know where we take this, but I don't think we can ignore this in terms of the overarching political conversations that we're having.
Well, when you were doing the disclaimer at the beginning about things may have changed, Dave, I was thinking, I mean, that's a certainty, you know, that
Right.
something's going to be different. It's hard to keep up. I think that nobody really knows where this is going to go. So this morning, the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and there's a whole debate about whether Lebanon was included in the agreement, and there's a disagreement about that. So it's just such an unstable situation. And obviously that puts everyone on edge, particularly people who are in harm's way. Obviously, that is the riskiest population. So people in the Middle East must just be their heads must just be spinning in terms of what's actually going to happen. I mean, here we don't know, and we listen to Dan McTague tell us about gas prices, and who knows what's going to happen in the next 24 hours. You know, it really feels like a dangerously unstable position for people in the Middle East and for the world, quite frankly.
Well, a year ago, Tim, we had two significant elections that were lauded as protecting us from Donald Trump. And boy, here we are again. Nobody saw this coming necessarily a year ago when we were worrying about tariffs.
Yeah, certainly the 2020s have been interesting times, right? And starting with COVID in March of 2020, through the re-election of President Trump, the dynamics that caused for us here in Canada and worldwide on trade, and now the war with Iran. But look, I know our main focus is provincial issues, maybe some federal, and Donald Trump is like the chief Darth Vader character, right, in our universe, and it's hard to cheer for Darth Vader, but like in the movie Aliens versus Predator, you got to pick a side. And, I do think that a reduced power for Iran that's basically been at war with the West since 1979 is going to be ultimately, good for us, a reduction in the power of Hamas and Hezbollah and their threat not only to Israel, but a combined force to us here in North America. Ceasefires are inherently unstable. Hopefully this carries through to some point of stability. But at the end of the day, I think a weakened, reduced, isolated Iran is healthy for us in Canada.
Yeah, Keith, I don't know if you read the piece in the New York Times yesterday, and they did the reporting from the Situation Room when Benjamin Netanyahu apparently made the pitch for the war in Iran. And it was so detailed and granular in terms of the reporting. They actually placed individuals in seats around the table, who was sitting next to whom and across from whom and so on, and noting that the president was not sitting at the head of the table when Netanyahu made his presentation. You know, like, it was very detailed, and good on the New York Times for having that kind of depth in reporting. But it occurred to me that the White House wanted that story out to get to the point where we did think about this. We actually gave it some thought. There was some meaning and context around the conversations, that it wasn't just the president off the top of his head. Now, that's the narrative that's been there. But to Tim's point, you know, the idea that we went in there with purpose and, you know, we intend on leaving with purpose.
We went in there with purpose. Okay, what was the purpose? I mean, they're trying to justify it now. I mean, it's kind of late to be doing that, especially when you declare a ceasefire. Very, very shaky. But the result of the ceasefire is that the Strait of Hormuz remains closed and that the Iranians remain in control of it. And yet we have Donald Trump saying, well, you know, we'll jointly toll the Strait of Hormuz. It's that kind of unreality, that inability to even seemingly grasp reality in any sense, that has the whole world, I think, shaking at this point, because Trump just doesn't seem to be gathering seeing any of the implications of what he's saying, talking about destroying a society and wiping out every bridge, destroying civilian society. That's just advocating war crimes, let alone just, wiping out a society when he has no war with the Iranian people. It's the regime he has the issue with. It just seems scary because he's so out of touch. I agree, ceasefires are always shaky. The fact that it wasn't clear from the get-go that Lebanon wasn't included in this and that Israel would keep going on with the bombing of Lebanon is atrocious, quite frankly. I mean, and it undermines the whole ceasefire as far as I can see, especially from Iran's point of view. If they're going to keep bombing Hezbollah in Lebanon, then Iran's going to keep fighting back. This isn't a ceasefire, although it may stop the Americans from bombing for a short while. It's still basically a mess, and as we say, things will definitely have changed by the time we finish our podcast or by the time it gets to air.
Well,
And Dave, to Tim's point, okay, a weakened Iran. If that's actually happened, Tim, I guess that's the question, If the terms of the ceasefire, and I am not an international expert by a long, long shot, but just listening to it, if the terms of the ceasefire were basically a series of demands by Iran because Trump had to find a way to back down, I question whether Iran is weakened, I mean, it's just, and I think that adds to the instability and the lack of kind of clarity about why they're there in the first place. So I think it's a mess. And I think that we are, as a world, we're just not out of the woods yet at all. And if you think there is a guarantee that Iran is weakened, that's one thing. But I guess I think there's still question marks around that.
Like, I think it's undeniable, inarguable, right? With the Navy practically wiped out, most of their weapons destroyed. They've attacked countries surrounding them, which isolates them within the Middle East. Their inability to finance to the same extent groups that are out to destroy Israel or, bomb here, right? That's, I think, inarguably been reduced as good as, and we're hopefully seeing a shift from the theocracy. Now it looks like it might be military dictatorship in return, but the ability to extend power from the U.S. and Israel to assassinate leaders who are against us. The woods are thick, no doubt about it. But Iran today, compared to where they were, at the beginning of 2026, demonstrably weakened.
Yeah, but then there's that small matter of 400 odd kilograms of enriched uranium.
Yeah.
So, and I don't mean to laugh, but if it weren't so serious, this could be funny. But bring it back home, Tim. The idea being, and the Prime Minister had to stick handle this question this week. Why the hell am I paying exorbitant prices for gasoline and diesel when we produce so much of it here in this country? And that's the kitchen table question right now. And I understand the answer, but it's not necessarily a satisfactory answer.
Yeah, this is a legacy of the Trudeau government's overreach, right? I think there's at least two things They broke very badly. Our immigration system, which had a consensus of support right across Canada for some time, was badly fractured, and now public opinion gone the opposite direction. And when it comes to the resource sector and the incredible wealth and opportunity we have here to produce oil, gas, and other resources, well-paying jobs, do so much more ethically than other countries, was basically severed by the Trudeau government. The opportunity, Canada, if we had the greater ability to get oil to market, natural gas to market, both for this Iran war, you never hope for wars, and the invasion by Russia of Ukraine, right? We could have had a significant windfall that we could have reinvested into rail, transportation, and hospitals. I lament the fact that we have closed our doors to what can make us a more prosperous country. And hopefully Prime Minister Carney will continue to reverse the direction of the Trudeau overreach.
Kathleen, though, they had the oil patch prom down in Texas, I guess, a couple weeks ago. And everybody who was anybody was down there, and they were talking about it. And some of the reporting that came out of it, I think it was from The Logic, was really kind of pointed. And it said, this is all great to talk about, the intention to have pipelines, et cetera. But there's nobody in the private sector who's standing up and saying, yes, I'm a champion of this idea. They don't want to be involved with the carbon capture. They don't and that's a key part of it. So, to put all of this on government, I don't think we can do that. And at some level, I don't know how you force private sector to step up and say we're going to produce more. They're making a lot of money just the way it is right now.
Yeah, and I don't, to put it on one government and to say that this all just happened since 2015, I think is a bit much. I mean, we're in this situation because of decisions that have been made over time, and I don't know. I don't know what's going to what the incentives are going to be for the private sector to step up. But you're absolutely right, Dave. Unless that happens, I think we're in a situation where the government's not going to be able to follow through on the development that needs to be done. So I don't know. I don't know where we go with this. I think that I lament that we haven't moved quicker in terms of getting off fossil fuels, and obviously there's an argument about that to be had. And I think we got slowed down by not picking a lane on that. I think that we didn't move fast enough in either direction. And so we're stalled. And now we're going to have to scramble to solve that issue. And in the interim, people are having real trouble paying the bills. And I don't know whether we're going to see the government do something on gas tax in the next little while. But it's a huge issue, and I think it is, it has been, but it's quickly becoming the top issue for people in terms of their kitchen table conversations.
What's the liter of gas in your neighborhood going for, Keith?
$1.80, $1.90.
Yeah, okay. So it's pretty consistent with what's happening here in the GTA. But as I hear that conversation around tax relief at the pumps, and everybody's talking about the feds, it occurs to me that this is one of those places where the provinces and the federal government could all stand up and say, this is what we're all doing collectively to bring those prices down, some relief there.
And then the international prices fluctuate 13 cents overnight, and all the government tax revenue is gone, and It didn't make any difference at the pumps. I think that's why governments are reluctant to move now, because the difference will be negated in a moment, in a heartbeat, given the world economic situation. I think to Tim's point about, we need more ways of getting our oil to market. Well, we need to get our oil to refineries in Canada. And that's one of the big problems. If we really want to control the prices, we need to be refining the oil into gasoline in Canada. And what do we have? Refineries in Montreal and St. John. I think that's it, right? We just don't have enough refineries. No one wants a refinery built anywhere near them, of course, because they're pretty dirty. But the bottom line is, if we really want to control gas prices, getting our oil to market is still not going to really do that. It'll help us. It'll give us better negotiating positions. But the refined gasoline coming back is still going to be world market prices. I just don't see a way around that. It was interesting to note the electricity demand from the IESO was that because we have shortened our demands on electricity, the switch to EVs, and the government's weakening its mandates, that the demand for electricity is not going to be as high in 2050 as they expected because of the change from EVs. Interesting. I mean,
Mm.
are we hurting ourselves by steering away from one direct policy on either electric vehicles or, more efficient oil and building refineries here to have gas combustion engines that are at least economical for people to run? Because right now people are scared to go to the gas pumps. It's at least $100 a fill up. And if you're going every week, that's a lot of money all of a sudden.
Yeah. And Tim, it's not sustainable. I mean,
Price of gas?
well, just this whole, the uncertainty, the price of gas, that we're getting to a point where governments are going to be handcuffed in terms of how they're going to make any kind of substantive decisions or planning for the next 12 months.
Could be. I mean, they said 2020s have been a wild decade so far. And, we thought things might slow down, hit stability after 25 was crazy, but looks like we're hitting the accelerator. Just on the oil and gas, like, in the last decade plus, the Americans have become, independent by actually expanding their oil and gas. Brazil has expanded substantially. Norway, right, a country similar to Canada, has expanded their oil and gas production. Australia, natural gas. There are lots of success stories, and we keep following because we just can't get anything built in this country. I'm one on the side of not taking off the tax. Let's not forget, Premier Ford has already permanently reduced the gas tax. Imagine how much higher things would be with it. And then Prime Minister Carney took the carbon tax off of gasoline as well, right? So, man, it would be just punishing. I think we'd be getting back to horses if we had both those taxes still on top of where prices are today.
The other issue around gas and combustion happened on Parliament Hill this week. Kathleen Wynne with the, I think, a somewhat surprising floor crossing by Marilyn Gladu, was the minister. She's the representative down near Sarnia on the St. Clair River. And we've talked a lot about the floor crossings, but this particular one I thought was an interesting one just in terms of her position on the political spectrum. At one point, talking about the Prime Minister now has a big tent. I think it was an NDP commentator suggesting it was a big enough tent to accommodate a truckers convoy. And then Lisa Raitt made the point that if the Prime Minister's like the Pied Piper, remember, all he did was lead the rats away. So this has become a meme in and of itself.
There's lots online.
Oh, completely. Yeah. And there's no shortage of it here, but it certainly has ignited the conversation. Last week, we were talking about the NDP, Avi Lewis leading that party, and really that convention was as much about what is the NDP as much as who should be the next leader of that party. You're getting to a point with the Liberals going into a convention this weekend where that's going to be a top-of-mind conversation. What does it mean now to be a Liberal federally?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'll be interested. I'm going to be canvassing with Dolly Begum and Danielle Martin this weekend in the 2 by-elections in Toronto. And I'll be interested to hear their perspective on it. I think this has to do with leadership, Dave. I think that the people you see moving from the Conservatives to the Liberals are moving because of a lack of leadership in the Conservatives, or leadership that they don't think is working, to leadership in the Liberal Party that they think is working, and respect for Prime Minister Carney. So, yeah, big tent. And I was as surprised as anyone that this particular member moved. I think there'll be interesting conversations, but she's going to have to change her tune in a way that will be kind of head swiveling for some of her constituents, for sure. But I have a lot of faith in the people I know in the Liberal caucus are not going to put up with some of the attitudes that this member has espoused. And if she wants to be part of the Liberal caucus, she's going to have to fall in line in terms of whether it's vaccines or whether it is some of the other social issues that she's had opinions on. She's going to need to fall in line, and so that's up to her. And she's in conversation with people in her constituency. They know her. She must have some information from them that leads her to believe that they'll be happy with this. That's certainly what she has said. She said that she was getting calls from people in her constituency. So, I think that the draw of the work that Prime Minister Carney is doing is very strong, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Keith, all I could think of, though, when I saw this story last night, it was Tom Wappel, and who served as a Liberal MP in Scarborough for like 20 years, and he was at odds at every turn in terms of his position with the Liberals. He was a law and order guy, but the leader of the party had to keep signing those candidacy papers that allow him to be seated as a Liberal on the ballot. So it's not the first time that this has happened, but it's
He
it's
was
one
a
of those things
social conservative too, Dave. He was definitely a social conservative
completely
on all sorts of issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Marilyn Gladu is not a red Tory. This is not someone we expected to cross the floor in any way, shape, or form. So it either is a massive appeal of Mark Carney that would get her to basically do a 180 on a lot of her previous positions, including what is recently in January, that floor crossers should cause a by-election. I don't know where she wants to go with this. I mean, clearly she's confident that she can get re-election there, but it's a very conservative area. All the ridings around there are blue. There's going to be a red dot and a blue C in southwestern Ontario. And I don't know. I think it's going to be very uphill for her within that caucus. That said, if Prime Minister Carney is willing to allow her to be outspoken on some issues, it may allow her to get reelected there. I think, to me, this stems from those Dodge-like letters that Pierre Poilievre sent out to the Conservative caucus earlier this week, or late last week, basically asking them to justify their jobs. What have you achieved? What are you doing in your critic? Do you want to stay in this position? And apparently a lot of the PC critics in particular were insulted by this. It was like, what have you done lately? List the media interviews you've done, when most of them haven't been given permission to do media interviews. So I think this is yet another slap at Pierre Poilievre's leadership, especially when you see someone as a small C conservative as her crossing over to the Liberals. This is direct shot at the leader of Pierre Poilievre, and I think it could be a fatally wounding one. I think this could be it. I mean, if they're looking at the by-election results on Monday, it looks like Carney's going to get his majority, and even a majority to the point where they don't need the Speaker's vote. They can, get right through. How many Conservatives are going to want to sit there for another 3.5, 4 years under Pierre Poilievre's leadership when he's lost so much? I just don't see it. I think this could be the beginning of the small C Conservatives either abandoning him, but crossing over to the Liberals. That was quite a shocker, I think, for her in this particular case. And the fourth Conservative MP to cross since last year's election? Come on, what does that say? It's all about the leadership in Poilievre.
Tim, I had to send my mom a text message last night. I just had to check her pulse because my mom was a supporter of Gladue in that riding down. They lived in Sombra at the time. Now, having said that, Mom has come around to saying she was an anti-liberal because she didn't like Justin Trudeau. This Carney guy's okay, but I just wanted to check her pulse last night to make sure she was still breathing and not gasping for air when she realized that Gladue had crossed the floor. Does this not come down to a real challenge, though, among other things, for the Prime Minister, Tim, managing the caucus?
Yes.
Period.
Yes. I think that's the story here, right? I know a lot of the conventional wisdom is this is some sort of reflection on Poilievre and it's over for Poilievre. And I think that's dead wrong. Again, the guy got 87% higher than Harper did.
Stacked house. Stacked house. Come on, that convention was stacked.
Mm-hmm.
You don't get that kind of result no matter what the rules unless you've got a strong support caucus. Bottom line, right? If there was some sort of caucus revolt, that kind of result would not have happened. And when I talk to caucus members, they're behind Poilievre. This fits, Dave Trafford, with my theory on the rat population that exists in every political party. And it is almost always self-interest. Right? It's not a matter of pride, a job that you're angling for, you think can become more prominent. I've known Marilyn Gladu since, well before she ran, because she was active with the engineers. Where Wynne may have met with her. She was there for all the lobby days. They had a goal of electing a certain number of engineers to public office, and she was one of their success stories. Her record is one of a social conservative with a libertarian streak. There's no tent large enough to have Marilyn Gladu and then the New Democrat floor crosser who backed, Avi Lewis in the same party. So I think the story here is to what you said. So I suspect Marilyn is leaving politics. I suspect this is a platform then to move on to further her career. And she was successful in the private sector. And as an engineer, she's 64, I think, now. So I think this is the next stage of life for her. And being in the PC caucus or the CPC caucus was not getting her there. So look, I think the issue here is about how does Carney manage that? We had an experience like this, and Premier Wynne and Keith, you'll remember too, when Tim Peterson crossed the floor from the Liberals and joined the PC caucus, and that caused John Tory, who was our leader at the time, a lot of headaches. There was a real split in caucus about this. There was a candidate geared up to go, FP Triantopoulos, who eventually became the MPP right in Mississauga, and caused a lot of disgruntlement with our ground forces in Mississauga in the party. Premier Harris faced something like this when Peter North was the New Democrat tourism minister, was involved in the scandal, was kicked to the NDP and wanted to join the PC caucus. And what Premier Harris did, then opposition party leader Harris had a vote in caucus, and they said no, they didn't want him. I cannot see this working out very well unless Marilyn just goes quiet and then moves off down the road into the private sector.
Kathleen, when there's some suggestion, though, that her location or geographic location as a border town MP is going to have some benefit for the Liberals when we start reviewing and having serious conversation about CUSMA. Anything to that?
Well, I think what's relevant about her location is that people in the border towns are really feeling the heat because of the tariffs, So when she says she's got people calling her, saying that they're suffering and they want action and they want some relief, I believe that. So I think that's where it's relevant. And she will bring that voice to the table. But beyond that, I don't believe that Mark Carney governs, nor should any prime minister govern, regionally. Obviously it happens. Obviously there are things that happen because people bring particular perspectives to the table, but he should be as aware of what's going on in Sarnia-Lambton, whether there's a Conservative representative there or not. So I don't think she's coming into the Liberal caucus because Mark Carney has said we're going to do X in your riding. Now, there were some jobs created in Nunavut after the NDP member came, but my guess is that was in the works anyway. So I think having those voices at the table, Dave, is always going to be helpful. That's the positive aspect of having a government that covers all the regions of the country, because you hear those voices immediately at the table. But I don't know beyond that policy will shift significantly because Marilyn Gladu will be in the caucus. Carney's going to do what he can to support the economy of the country, and Sarnia-Lambton's part of that.
Of course, we spent a good deal of time in the last few weeks, Keith, speaking of border towns, talking about Niagara and what was going on in the region there, and particularly around the questions around amalgamation. And as we noted, things may change. It was just shortly after we hit the stop button on last week's podcast that Minister Rob Flack got up and said, oh, by the way, we're going to appoint regional chairs, then they're going to have what amounts to, something similar to the strong mayor powers and so on. We're going to change the way the regional government is set up and the council is set up, in particularly Niagara, but there were other implications for regional governments around that. All I could think of was I have never seen such an epic Friday dump on Holy Thursday.
Well, it was a head scratcher because it reached as far as the Waterloo region.
Yeah.
They're going to change the governance all around the place by appointing regional chairs, which would normally be elected out of the local regional council mayors. It seems undemocratic on its face because you're just appointing chairs. On the other hand, if you want to really achieve the goals, can this make the difference? Can this, by appointing these regional chairs and cutting the size of these regional councils, can they make the difference in the local governance? Can they get it more efficient? Can they stop the duplication and wasted efforts? Can they get things built? More importantly, can they get the infrastructure and the housing built faster, or at least sooner than they're getting it done now? I still think they should have elected ones, or just have the regional mayors, the regional council, elect one from within their own. Why does the province need to appoint an outside chair coming in when, they're all politicians. Why do they need someone appointed to come in to do this? Clearly, to make sure the government's goals stay in the forefront of what the regional councils are deciding. I guess it's a smart move from that sense. Whether politically it's palatable, whether the undemocratic aspect of it will fly with people, or they'll just accept it because they realize there does need to be some change in the way the governance is done, especially in the Niagara region. But they're looking, as I said, Waterloo, Halton region. There's a lot of changes coming here. It's big, significant stuff, and people should be paying more attention to it. But I'm afraid it's just not sexy stuff that people really care a whole lot about. They do understand the one aspect of the council not being elected, that they're going to be appointed. But other than that, it's just regional governance. It's hard to get people really excited about it one way or the other unless they're directly involved in governments, local governments.
Well, Tim, I know it was 70 odd years ago, but I just bring it up in the conversation that I was having with us this week to say Fred Gardner. I mean, and he was appointed by the premier of the day, and I think probably sat in the chair as the head of Metropolitan Toronto for a decade or so. And to Keith's point, as undemocratic as it might have sounded, chances are that Metropolitan Toronto and the Toronto we have today would not have been as successful, if you want to even venture that far, if they hadn't had somebody as strong as a guy like Gardner in the chair.
Yeah, I think it's
There's a
very
big
fair.
debate you're opening there, Dave.
I know, I get it.
I'll say that. I'll call that fair. It's a fair ball. This is not a new trick. And the appointment of regional chairs has existed for a while, right under the Ford government. Jim Bradley, in fact, was appointed the late great Jim Bradley was appointed, and it was a great call. He really helped to put things on a much better track than they were in Niagara. Worked well with municipalities and the council, and got them out of some unfortunate practices that had existed in the previous administration. So I was involved with this, both in terms of giving advice and also acting in my capacity as a partner at Council of Public Affairs for 8 Niagara municipalities who were opposed to forced amalgamation. And I like the way this landed with one caveat. I'm happy that there was not a forced amalgamation in this circumstance. I think that would have politically been a lot of calories used up by the government. And for the wrong reasons, amalgamations actually tend to ratchet up costs as opposed to lower them. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that was where Niagara was at. They actually get at the core problem in Niagara, which was a unwieldy regional government that was growing in size, administration, and consistently raising taxes, but not perceived as delivering better quality services for residents. And ending some duplication, right? Do you really need regional roads and local roads at the same time? The story, right? The plow goes up when you go over the regional road to go back down on the municipal side. So there's a lot of good here, I think, in sensible government and the right political decision. There is definitely a pattern in the Ford government for consolidating power provincially. There's a frustration that others aren't delivering. So whether that's conservation authorities, whether that's administrative authorities where they appoint the chair, now municipalities, or certainly school boards, right, are the back of the class, I guess, in the Ford government, and the takeovers now represent a significant part of the population. It's the strong chair powers, right, will be, because that chair will be both appointed and given greater authority. Strong mayors are directly elected. And I also worry because, I'm on the blue team, they won't be there forever. And I can't imagine the likes of a John Sewell type in Niagara being appointed by a left-leaning government in the future having that kind of authority. So I do worry about that.
Well,
Look
Kathleen,
at us. We're going to be in ferocious agreement. Him and I. Look at this.
Stop the
I-
press.
Well, I was going to say, though, just it's easy to forget, though, that at one point, and this was shortly before amalgamation, there were 7 councils in Toronto, because East York, Scarborough, York, they all had their own city councils. They all had their own mayors. So we here in Toronto, it's not that far in the rearview mirror that we were going through the same thing. And even at that, in those days, it never made sense to have, all of the mayors. And then we elected some in some areas directly to regional council. So again, it may not, I get your point. I'm opening a big debate about whether or not this was a success or not, but it couldn't be sustained that way in terms of having the level of whether it was innovation or procurement or whatever it might have been around delivery of service. Something had to be done. And whether or not we intended to, create a horse and ended up with a camel in Toronto, I suspect that we're in the same boat in Niagara, but we had to do something.
Yeah, but sure. But there's lots of discussion about what we could have done as opposed to what we did do, Dave. So, the forced amalgamation of the city of Toronto, there are people who will argue that it really has never gelled, that the old suburbs like Scarborough and Etobicoke and North York still don't jive with downtown Toronto. And, Anne Golden and Ken Greenberg have just put out a book called Fixing Toronto. And they argue, Anne Golden argued at the time, that we should keep the 6 municipalities and we should have a GTA level government as opposed to a metro government, right? So make the regional government bigger, but keep the innovation that is possible with having the smaller cities. That's a whole discussion that's over. But my concern, like Tim's, is, and for different reasons, of course, because I would be fine with a John Sewell type.
Oh no,
he's one of my mentors, but I really worry about the consolidation of power, the centralization of power. And Tim has named my concerns, the regional chair appointments, the conservation authorities, the trustees, school board authorities, all of that being located in the ministers, I think it's a problem, and I think it's a problem that people are not they're not aware of necessarily, and won't be until there are big mistakes being made or their lives are being affected, which I would argue is already happening in terms of the school boards that are under supervision. But when they don't have the same water source protection because the conservation authorities are more beholden to the government than they were, and they are larger and they don't have the same connection to the municipality. So I think there are big problems because of the consolidation of power. There was a mix of appointment and election of regional chairs, and it could have gone either way. It could have gone all election. It could have gone all appointments. I would have preferred the all election. I think the system of regional government across the province is confusing at best. There's very little system in it. And so moving to one or the other, I think, was a good thing. I would have preferred, and I think it would have been better for the democratic health of the province, to move towards elected chairs, everybody be elected. Jim Bradley, by the way, would have been fine with that, I'm pretty sure, the elected chair. So I think this is a mistake. I think that it is putting too much power in the hands of too few.
I just want to say on the success of the amalgamation, or what sold me as a Toronto resident at the time on amalgamating the cities, was Mel Lastman as mayor of North York, his policy on the homeless, which was to give them subway tokens and tell them to go downtown. You can't operate a city that size with that. Now, how he got elected mayor of the first, I don't know. But that just stuck with me. It's that kind of petty bullshit that was going on. And if you have 6 mayors running a city, that's what you get, is that kind of nonsense. So I think it had to be done. I don't say it was done right. I don't say but to Dave's point, I think we wouldn't have had the success or the ability to hold it as one city if we hadn't have taken this step at this point. It was just too divisive.
Keith, look what happened. To your point, he got elected the first mayor of the amalgamated city. So the bullshit just moved from North York to City Hall for the whole city. So I mean, bullshit is bullshit, and it's going to happen. And people have to take responsibility for electing who they elect, But it doesn't mean that the city is better functioning because it's larger. And to Tim's point about amalgamation, it certainly is not more efficient. It certainly doesn't run cheaper than it did previously. So, got to convince me that there's been positive benefit. I don't see it.
On if I could, Dave, on the Mel Lastman thing, I'll do 2 things here, just to correct the record on one thing, or just clarify, and then secondly, I'll do my sort of quarterly self-promotion and back patting. That's okay with you.
Carry on. Only quarterly?
I'm going to get corrected again.
Yeah, okay. That's there you go. But on the correct record, so this wasn't a dump Thursday before Easter. Like, this had actually been in motion for some time. They have a limited calendar now, right? They don't sit as much as they used to, so it's pretty impactful. But I can't tell you, this wasn't something they threw out to try to hide. It was actually legislation had planned for some time. As Premier Wynne pointed out, they picked a lane and they decided to go with the appointed chairs broadly, shrink councils in a number of areas, including Niagara. So it's not like it was a last minute thing. And then, backpedaling on that last one. So if you play back the tape, I did, because I've been through this rinse cycle 3 or 4 times, predict there would not be forced amalgamations in Niagara when this happened. So there's my backpadding. You may recall Mel Lastman. I did say that Jim Diodati is playing the Mel Lastman character in this saga in Niagara. So we'll see if part 2 turns out, if he ends up being the appointed chair down the road. He is very much aligned, with where the federal government wants to go, getting homes built and making Niagara an enhanced tourism destination. So that bet is still riding on the roulette wheel.
Just on the Mel Lastman and the homeless issue, during a debate in the election between him and Barbara Hall, he boasted that North York does not have any homeless people. And then a couple of weeks later, a homeless woman was found dead.
She died in North York.
She died in the Shell station. She was found dead in the Shell station at Hogs Hollow. And a long way around, that is the story of Linda, who lived at the corner of Lawrence and Leslie on a park bench, and the locals in the neighborhood who didn't want homeless people in their North York neighborhood took the bench away. And when the local church found out that this was going on, they were appalled. So, and they found out that she had died alone in this gas station washroom. They put the bench back. They now have an annual walk for Linda in the neighborhood in September. And I've told you about St. Clair Inn before. That's in her name. And this now is transitional housing for homeless women in Toronto. And it punches above its weight. So for all of Mel's bluster about homelessness, it's still a major issue. But the irony in all of it is his comments actually created an opportunity to help homeless women well beyond what the cities have done in many respects, and created this transitional housing model that allows them within a year to be living independently in the community. So I know it's a long way to go to get silver lining, Keith, but that's the heart of that story. And that's what kind of drives you a little bit crazy. All these many years later, it's a not-for-profit organization punching way above its weight that has to kind of carry the weight of what governments kind of ignored. And Mel was a good example of it.
Well, and we see that still, don't we, with the homeless situation? I mean, it's volunteer groups that are out doing their best, nonprofits that are doing their best. Governments seem to be studying the issue, looking to find ways that they can help, but it's been very ineffective, it seems, overall, other than pushing people out of the more public parks. This problem is getting worse. We're seeing more and more people ending up without housing, living in parks, living in ravines. Some of whom need to be in institutions, some of whom just need a hand up and some help. But it's not coming from governments. And it's not for a lack of will, but I think it's a lack of a champion. There's one champion within the government, one champion at the cabinet table for the homeless people. I know lots of ministers care. They do care about this. They do speak about these issues. But there's no action plan. There's no furious thing. We see it in other countries. We see it even in the state of Texas, where there are programs that really work to get people off the streets and into actual permanent housing. Why can't we follow these? Why aren't we getting there? It's only the nonprofits that seem to be making any headway at all. Why can't governments take more direct action on this? I don't know. I don't have the answers, but they're out there, and the governments need to do something. As I say, a single champion at the cabinet table, I think, would make a big difference on this issue. Something has to be done, because so many of the homeless end up in the emergency departments because they have no other way of accessing warmth, let alone health care. And then they're clogging up that system as well, and it just backlogs everywhere. We need to do something about this. And as I said, I've said it before, I know it's not a popular idea, but we do need some mental health institutions where people live permanently inside them because they can't fend for themselves.
Well, Kathleen, I know you're well aware of what's going on with St. Clair Inn and so on, but the one of the things that I hear consistently from the nonprofit groups is, to some degree, ironically, they don't want government involved. They don't want the government money, because then there are sort of limitations on how they can spend it and where they can spend it, and the plan they take. So there's a role for the not-for-profit, but coordinating it with government services seems to be the challenge.
Yeah, and I've been on Linda's Walk many times, and the St. Clair Inn, I think, is a terrific model. Um, and yeah, government getting involved sometimes messes up the works, but the reality is there aren't enough St. Clair Inns to resolve the issue. So there has to be government action. And one of the things I would say, I always wonder what Jane Jacobs would tell us at this point, because she really understood cities and she loved Toronto. And she used to come to the Citizens for Local Democracy meetings that we ran with John Sewell during the pushback on amalgamation. And one of the things that we talked about, and I wonder if she would reinforce this now, is that if we had those smaller units, those smaller cities, would there be solutions that would be developed locally that then could be copied and replicated in the other jurisdictions? And that kind of innovation. I mean, one of the challenges with the City of Toronto Council is trying to find something that works for all the different cultures of those 6 separate municipalities. I mean, the sidewalk snow clearing is a really good example. We didn't, in the City of Toronto, we didn't have sidewalk snow clearing, and there were, sure, there were seniors who needed support, and they could get that. But look at all the problems they're having with the equipment to try to plow the sidewalks in those little neighborhoods with little sidewalks, and they don't fit, and it's all geared. That program is geared to a more suburban neighborhood where there are wider sidewalks, wider roads. So, I mean, that's a very pedestrian example, if I can say. And I think that there are lots of ways in which that kind of innovation just doesn't happen across the big city. So I don't know the answer, but I don't think we found it. And certainly in terms of homelessness, yes, not-for-profits need support in terms of the community, but we've got to Keith's point, we've got to have better systems provincially or municipally to help people. And we made a decision as a society to close the kind of institutions that you're talking about, Keith, and we made that decision for all the right reasons: warehousing people, not treating them well, not letting them live to their full potential, all of that. But we did not, as a society, and this is not just Dalton's government, my government, Ford government, we did not as a society decide that we were going to put the resources in place that were necessary to help people integrate into the community. So organizations like Community Living had to pick up the slack, right? And it's not enough. And we've got to wrap our heads around whether we move towards what you're talking about, Keith, more places where people can live permanently, which would be institutions. I mean, make no mistake, there would be an institutional aspect to that, or whether we find a way to better put the resources into the community and work with not-for-profits, which happens in some cases. I mean, the Y has built, I think, 30 units in downtown Toronto just in the last few years that are housing people who otherwise wouldn't be housed. But, 30 units is a drop in the bucket. So we got to make that decision as a society.
We talked about this last week, Tim, in terms of the the soft numbers or the top numbers in the polling for the Tories at Queen's Park, and generally relatively healthy. The Premier taking a bit of a heat on his approval ratings, but then when you went item by item, they were struggling. And we cited the liaison poll, I guess it was last week, and one of the things that came up was the FOI changes. Then this week, Abacus did a similar poll, found FOI changes are resonating with the general public. Does that surprise you? Because it sounds like a kind of a wonkish, geeky, kind of down in the weeds conversation that, we in the media and the opposition are having. But does it surprise you that it's coming to the surface in terms of awareness, first of all, and kind of a question around the behavior of the government?
No, not at all. I'll give you 2 reasons for that. Number one, I think the main driver here is just the old political balance between, the irresistible force of gravity, where people get tired of leaders or parties after a while, right? That tends to be around the 7-year point, the 10 maximum. Ford has defied that gravity with 3 majority governments with an increased share of the vote, right? That's never happened in Ontario's history. So far he's found that magic. So I guess that force of gravity is up against the immovable object of Ford's political instincts and his ability to connect, as the common man, right? He's got that sort of common touch. So I think you're seeing some of that movement because it's hard to defy gravity. I think Liberal numbers are probably up because of the performance of Prime Minister Carney and the federal Liberal label as a result. But this is sort of a natural thing. However, where this plays in, I do think if the FOI issue is given some significant spotlight by the opposition, it really does undermine that common touch there for the people Ford brand. And so this has come up in conversations with Debbie and I with neighbors. Like one person perceived they're hiding how much money they get paid, right? They knew something was being hidden. Another one said, so does this mean, that they could go out and have fancy dinners and nobody would know about it? So I think there's a vulnerability there. Now, the House is in recess for Easter week. They'll come back to it, but I've not seen yet the Democrats and Liberals pierce enough on this issue, but I do think it's a vulnerability for the two reasons I laid out significantly.
Yeah, Keith, it's one of those things where it's a very specific change to the freedom of information legislation. But the implication is that it's broad reaching. We're completely eliminating freedom of information, which is not entirely true. But to Tim's point, once you have to start explaining it, you're losing.
Well, you're not only losing. The question comes as a very basic question, and Tim's friends raised it. What are you hiding? Why do you need to do this? You already had pretty solid protections under FOI legislation that exist. Yes, it was outdated. You could bring it up to date with some things, but you didn't need to extend it to all the documents going to any cabinet minister. It just was extended way too far. It's a big overreach. One thing I took away from it is that I think the reason it's playing with people in the polls is because they understand the whole cell phone issue, that the premier, while it's a populist thing to say anybody can call me, he is conducting government business on his cell phone and then refusing to release those records. And now we find out other government staffers, chiefs of staff, people in the offices are also conducting government business on cell phones, and we don't have access to this. This is straight up nonsense. I mean, it does really do. What are you hiding? Who are you talking to? Why are you talking? All this is just nonsense. The thing I saw most in that poll, though, and it's always something I look at every poll when you're talking about governments like this, and this one, it doesn't always get reported. This one, it's the one to watch. Time for change, and it's over 51%. Yes, he got his third majority a year ago. He went early to get it. This shows it was smart for him to call that election a year early, regardless of what was going on in the world situation, because he knew his numbers would eventually start going. That time for a change number, over 51%, it's not fatal at that point. Once it hits 60, it's pretty much fatal. But other premiers that face those numbers, and they know there's not much you can do to turn it around once you start seeing everybody wants a change. And to Tim's point, it's a natural thing. After 8 to 10 years, your government is just people, they can smell the toast and you're done. Unless you have some major policy issue or your opposition doesn't have any real, a leader or anything else to offer on the table. But right now, I think for the most part, that time for a change is going to haunt them for a while. And they're going to want to put a lot of effort into bringing that number down. Whether that'll mean changes to the FOI legislation, I somehow doubt it. I think they're going to stick to their guns on this.
Well, it occurs to me, Kathleen, every time.
There's another thing going on here too, though.
Go ahead.
Sorry. There's something else going on here too, and we've talked about it on the pod. The sort of simmering distrust. So whether it's the Greenbelt, whether it's Ontario Place, and now the FOI, there's kind of an accumulation of things that are coming to bear on this. I think that when I talk to people about the FOI and they ask me about it, they're surprised to hear that it's retroactive, and that actually feeds into the, well, what are you trying to hide? And people go pretty quickly to Greenbelt. So I think that while there is, look, I am an expert in governments, living beyond their due date and then paying the price for that. So I think there is a natural, obviously there's a natural progression here, but I think, this is a vulnerability for this government. Ford talks a good game about being accessible and, being for the people. There's always been a question about which people is he for, and who's he accessible to, you know? It's one thing to stand at a podium and be accessible to, you know, the camera. It's another thing to actually do things that are in the best interests of people. And I think not everyone and more people feel that that is not what this government is doing. And I think that's what these numbers are showing.
Yeah, it occurs to me that the more often now lately that we get stories, Tim, that cite based on a Freedom of Information request, we learned this. And Global News this week had the story about, you know, how many audits, forensic audits were done on certain ministries over the last number of years. And they make it really clear. We know this because we had, you know, access to information through FOI requests. And up until this week or this last couple of weeks, that probably would have washed right over most people's heads. But now that it's kind of front and center, it's like, you know, remember the days of truck tires falling off? It seemed though now, as soon as we said it out loud, it happened all the time, right? It's kind of
It's true.
self-fulfilling prophecy. But people will take notice of it perhaps now more when it shows up in media than they ever did.
Yeah, and look, we talked about the John Sewell's ghost, right? So along that line, you know, I think we used quite effectively the FOI tactics when I was leader of the opposition. The gas plant scandal stands out as one example. And someday you're going to be on the other side of the house, and
Exactly.
this limits your ability. And I remember too, if there was something that, you know, Premier McGuinty were bringing in when he had his majority, and I became, you know, opposition leader when John Tory stepped down. We're trying tactics, right, to try to get some leverage for some trade-offs, some changes in the bill, and say, oh, this tactic, oh, we don't have that anymore. Why not? Well, because you guys took it away when you were in government, right? So,
yeah. Oops.
The shoe fit.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Well, let's leave it there. John Wright is vacationing with his son. He's on a family tree trip to Ireland. So I expect we'll hear all kinds of information about the Wright family tree when he comes home. And we're going to be down next week. I'm off for a couple of weeks, so you guys may enjoy my time off. And we'll be back at it again in a couple of weeks. So Tim Hudak, Kathleen Wynne, Keith Leslie, thank you for being here. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast. I'm Dave Trafford, and have a great week.